Well, when we were all ordered to stay home in the pandemic, Passover plans were sort of upended, but luckily we got a special production, a Saturday Night Seder, that held us over for that celebration, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm Sam Eckmann of Goldberg, and with me is one of the writers, Goldberg, as well as executive producer, writer, and songwriter, Benj Pasek. Thanks both for sitting down with me today. This whole event was really born out of the pandemic and out of everything that we are going through. And it had no network behind it, no kind of funding behind it like that. So what were the first conversations like? How did this come to fruition?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. That's a big win already for me.
That's a big takeaway.
It's a big takeaway. Sass and I actually went to college together, and go Blue, little Michigan love. And yeah, this came out of a time when I think we were all those of us who were lucky enough to not be dealing with the horrific nature of COVID-19 on the front lines, were in our apartments wondering what we could do to be helpful during this crazy time. And as isolation and loneliness and this sort of sense of like, hey, what can we do to help began to sink in, there was this like ticking clock of like, oh, also this holiday of Passover is coming up. And, if you're a Jew, this, and if you're not, then like you probably do too, because it's one of the biggest holidays in like Jewish culture. But it really is that time, and like you are gathered together with community and with friends, and you tell this story that really is a very meaningful one for a lot of Jewish people to retell. And we were just kind of, I think, looking at the possibility of like, what is this going to be without getting to be with our loved ones, and like, can we do something to, I don't know, remedy that in some kind of way. So yeah, then like, folks in my life, kind of came together to begin to envision what that could be. And Sass, of course, is like an old friend, and we've written things together, and it was really like exciting to be like, hey, like, it was kind of like a you up, like, do you want to like work on a Passover Seder?
Very you up in nature. I got a random text and I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And I think I imagine that's how other people sort of came on board. So it was kind of a thing of like, well, I'm home and I can help and I'd love to help. So let's do this. I don't think any of us had any sort of idea of what it would become.
Yeah. And so then if we're all stuck at home, how do you handle like the writer's room of sharing ideas back and forth is a little bit more difficult in this current situation?
Yeah, I do think the nature of what we do is a very collaborative job. So I think we're all kind of open to being a little bit clumsy about it and bootstrap. And so it was either phone calls or it was text or it was video calls. It was kind of happening in real time. I don't think we were as sophisticated with Zooms quite yet. It feels like so long ago when you talk about March and like when we started this conversation of what technology, how we do rely on it now. But in those beginning times, we didn't have totally the language to use. So it was very much, hey, are you around right now? The two of us are on a call. Can you pop in? And that's how it started happening. And then it became sort of formal writing sessions and shooting sessions and things like that. But in the beginning, it was like, who's around? I'm eating dinner. I'll call you in 10. That was pretty fun.
Yeah. And like, sort of assembling like how you would assemble, I guess, a writer's room, but it was basically it was a function of like who was around at that time, who, any of us happened to be texting with at that time, who was kind of down for like, hey, we kind of did it in a little over 2 weeks. So it was like, hey, like, are you busy? And kind of everybody was like, no, I'm like watching Tiger King. Like, what can I do?
Tiger King. Oh my God.
How long ago does that feel, And
Joe Exotic who?
Joe Exotic who? So yeah, it was really like, friends of friends, and then you would like Sass would gather a songwriter. I'd be like, oh, I know somebody who writes comedy, or like, and Eric Bergen worked on the Rosie O'Donnell,
I went to camp with him. It was like that sort of conversation.
And he's Jewish, right? So like, let's wrangle him in. So it was kind of like the first week of it was very much just like, hey, let's figure it out. And then it kind of took on a more sort of formalized tone in the sense that we were like, we sort of like in like a self-imposed kind of way became very like dedicated to this. And it became like something that we started to take very, very seriously.
It was a job too. I remember like feeling like I'm going to be late to our session, like the session that we just had set an hour beforehand. So it's not like this was on the cal for so long and like we were disappointing people, but there was this nature of like, we show up, this is our job and this is what we're here to do. So we took that seriously, and we all have very different schedules, and, you know, particularly with pandemic setting in and self-quarantining at home, we all had different circumstances we were dealing with, whether it was like moving back in with our parents or having children to take care of full time and working. So it was, everyone had a different set of circumstances.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of songwriting, the whole thing opens with this new song, Dainu, led by the great Jason Alexander. And as an opener, what was sort of the most important thing to get across? What tone are you trying to go for in that opening?
Yeah, so another person who's in our writer's room is this great writer named Hannah Friedman. And we didn't even anticipate that we were going to have original numbers in this when we first started. We were like just doing, you know, sketches. And what's great about a Passover is that it basically, it is a story. Like if you've seen The Prince of Egypt, you know that like Passover has a story to it. So we were like, okay, how do we kind of riff on the story and the narrative? And then Hannah one day was like, guys, I wrote like the beginning of an opening number. And we were like, you what? Like we have like 2 weeks to do this whole thing, you know? And she was like, here it is. And she like, played this fantastic, you know, draft of this opening number. And from there, you know, it became really a collective thing of like people who weren't songwriters all of a sudden became songwriters, and, you know, people who were comedy writers were sort of jumping in. And with that song in particular, you know, as we were like out to talent and texting people and being like, hey, like someone like Jason Alexander, like, do you want to do this Passover statement? Raise some money. You know, the whole thing was also an effort that we felt very strongly about to raise money for the CDC Foundation and you know, make sure that, you know, we could use this time that we weren't doing anything to try to do something to be helpful, you know, and raise money for those who are, you know, on the front lines fighting COVID-19. And so when we began, it was like, oh, well, okay, we have Jason Alexander and maybe we'll start with an opening number. And then, you know, as more and more people came on board, you know, folks like Darren Criss or Josh Groban or Rachel Brosnahan, all of a sudden, like in very real time, because it was so compressed, we were writing material like specifically for them or specifically for Jason, because we knew that they were going to like literally film it like 3 days later. And, you know, and also a gift about, you know, some of those performers that we just named are that some of them are Jewish, but some of them are not Jewish. In a great way, I think. It was this big razzmatazz like opening number that also kind of attempted to say like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's messed up in the world right now, but like, let's try to find some joy and community while we're doing it. And for those of you who might not be Jewish, as you know, some of those actors, you know, weren't in the opening number, this is something that can include you too. And, you know, the idea of the Passover story is one about going from confinement to, you know, liberation, going from winter to spring, going from a narrow place to an open space, and like all during a literal plague. So, you know, the resonance of like being like, hey, this is something that exists in Jewish culture, but like kind of everybody could use a little bit of a Passover Seder right now and like a seat at the, you know, at the table. And so we wanted to write something that felt like it was joyful and uplifting and welcomed you into this world, regardless of whether you knew, you know, a lot about this particular holiday or Judaism or not. And something that also said like, hey, we recognize that we're all going through hardship, but let's try to, you know, have a little bit of joy amidst this very, very trying time.
Yeah, and Passover specifically is about community. At least that's like what it is for me, people coming together to break bread. And obviously coming together was not possible at the time. So we wanted to create some sort of community and put the community up towards a task, which was raising money. And honestly, our goals were humble of what we thought we could raise.
Well, now it's certainly gone beyond. You've raised over $3 million and counting. What is it like feeling the impact of that beyond your humble origins?
It was interesting, like right after it aired, I mean, Benj, you could speak for yourself, but my phone and my email was unlike anything. I mean, it felt like my daughter being born, on Broadway, my wedding all in one. It was I couldn't believe the texts and the calls I was getting that people were watching at home. And we had done pretty much like we blasted it out on our Instagram pages and things like that. I don't have thousands of followers. So I was shocked to see all these sort of people tune in. And then people that didn't even hear about it from me tuned in. And I think at the end of it, when the credits rolled, they wanted to see like, who did this? Because we, at the time, there was nobody really for us to look to say like, hey, how did you do your quarantine Passover special? Or how did you do your quarantine footage? There wasn't much going on at that time because it was very much in the beginning of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And, I was curious about how you sort of, because it incorporates the joyfulness, the comedy, as well as the history. And I'm wondering how you decided to pair up certain performers, because like I didn't realize I needed a history lesson from Deborah Messing and Richard Kind, but I absolutely did need it in my life. So how did you go about figuring out those pairings?
I mean, a lot of it was like, friends of friends of friends, or, whether someone's agent would write us back, or, like just like the collection of people. And what was cool is that it started off like very much like some people that we knew. And then it really snowballed into this thing where like, I think that we kind of needed something to be working on to put our efforts, towards, and to feel like we were doing something, productive during this time where, we were very, uncertain and isolated and didn't know, what to do with ourselves. And then it kind of came about that like other people so beyond our reach kind of found us. And so all of these incredible people all of a sudden were like, hey, like we'll be a part of it. So, when you get to be like, oh, hey, we have a writer's room of all these wonderful people. And hey, guess what? Like Deborah Messing's in, you know what I mean? Or like Richard Kind is in. So it's like, what are we going to have them do? And,
yeah, there wasn't sort of a cast list necessarily. They were like, this is going to be a great role for this person. It was kind of like, as we were pouring in, or as we knew somebody, we're like, okay, Tan France wants to do something. So I guess, oh, Beanie's available that day. There was that nature to it as well.
Yeah. And like, what are the fun pairings? Or like, having like Billy Porter sing, Go Down Moses, while like Henry Winkler reads the story of Moses from like a children's book, which like, by the way, he provided himself. Like everybody just kind of like did their thing. So in terms of like the conception of that, I think it was really just like us in the writer's room, basically like a bunch of us on Zoom being like, oh my gosh, like these heroes of ours are available. Like wouldn't it be so cool to see them play together in this way? Or wouldn't this be a really cool pairing? And, that was true for like, Judith Light and Ben Platt, or Julie Klausner and Pamela Adlon, or
I think some of it was Mad Libs too. Like we were like, how cool would it be if Adina Menzel sang the 4 questions? And like that really was kind of the conceit of it. And then like 4 questions.
Yeah, like Finn Wolfhard is gonna play like a fictional son of Nick Kroll. Like it was just like, okay, like I guess that'll be the bit, And so much of it just happened because of the people who were down, and that was a real joy to like get to write on the fly like that based on people's availabilities and just like putting it together as it was happening.
Yeah. It's very impressive with all that comedy, because you're watching this thing, you're laughing the whole time, you're getting some history, and then all of a sudden you don't expect to just cry at the end. But the last song, Next Year, is incredibly moving. So how do you, what goes into those lyrics for you? Because I feel like they're very resonant for today's climate and the things we've lost and are missing.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, like, so much of that exists in, this is so corny, and like I'm not that religious, which is, this process has made me appreciate my own culture in such a deeper way. But like those lyrics are literally based on the story of Passover, which is, Harvey Fierstein did this beautifully written piece where he talks about next year in Jerusalem, which is how you end every Passover. And the idea is that even though you might be in a place where times are really uncertain and you're facing incredible doubts, you tell this story again and again every year to remind yourself that you were once in a place where you felt like you were totally trapped, and you as your people eventually became free from that trapped place. So this idea of like next year in Jerusalem means like, hey, even if we're not there now, a year from now we're going to be in our homeland, and that's the metaphor. And so getting to, again, this was like a Hannah Friedman special. She was like, hey guys, like here's like a draft of a closing number. We were like, oh my God, Hannah Friedman. And then it was another kind of like you up text with this wonderful singer-songwriter friend of ours named Shayna Taub, who, you know, when Hannah submitted that song, she then had to like go, she was writing on a television show. She was like, guys, I'll be back in like 5 hours and then I'll check in. And, you know, this was, you know, at like midnight on East Coast time. And so we like, you know, we texted Shayna and we were like, hey, you up? And she was like, yeah, what's up? We were like, do you want to write a song in 3 hours about like, you know, Jewish stuff? And she was like, I'm game. So it really all came together, like, and, you know, we wrote that song like on Zoom and on Google Docs, like all kind of working on it at the same time, doing edits in real time, you know, changing chord progressions at the same time. And like, you know, figuring out how this could be this culmination of, you know, what we hope to be this, you know, special. And then the other really cool part was like, you know, some of the stuff is like the lyrics are, you know, resonant and that they come from the story of Passover. But a lot of it is that someone on the team, I think Mark Sonnenblick, who also worked on the song, knew to leave room for all of these people to express their wishes and their hopes for what they wanted in this next year. So, you know, the sort of bridge of the song is really just like, you know, the guy who did the arrangement, Ben Wexler, you know, sort of singing next year over and over again, while you get to hear everybody from, you know, like, you know, Adina Menzel being like, you know, next year I hope to sing, you know, or be in a theater with all of you, to like people who submitted videos who are, you know, literally in ICUs, who were, you know, dealing with COVID, to a guy who is a grocery store clerk who was talking about saving money to go back to his family in Mumbai, you know, and like, and it was amazing to get the totality of like all of these different people getting to give their wish for what they want, you know, a year from now, and how far away from this present moment of, you know, fear and uncertainty, you know, we all hope to be next year and in the near future.
I also think being in quarantine made us all feel sort of alone. And there was something about seeing all these sort of people around the world, not just around New York or around the country, but around the world, chime in with a similar sentiment, and to realize that, like, and this sounds cheesy, but it's truly not, we're all in this. And so there was something really humbling about that.
Yeah. Well, it was a fantastic special, and one of the first ones that we really got, and a great example of how the community could come together to help one another out. So thank you all for giving us our Saturday Seder, and best of luck as the season progresses. Everyone who's watching at home, please subscribe to Gold Derby, and thank you both for talking with me.
Thank you so much.